and welcome to the Lulu and Hazel Quilt Shop. I'm Charity, and today we're going to quilt this table runner on the Janome Skyline S9 embroidery machine, and we're really excited about it. Before we get started with that, be sure and subscribe to our channel to be notified of any and all videos we post in the future. And go ahead and like this video, and in the comments, let us know what you like about it. Let us know what you might like to see in the future. We love to hear everybody's feedback. So right here you see I am prepping this table runner quilt sandwich to be quilted. This is an important step no matter what you're quilting, whether it be a quilt, a placemat, a table runner. You just need to pick your preferred method of preparing the quilt sandwich. So because this was a small project, a table runner, I just decided to use the 505 basting spray. So I've used that to adhere all three layers of this sandwich. Of course, I've made sure to give myself a little more batting and backing than table runner. The batting and backing are larger than the table runner itself. This gives us extra room to line up the project, and also this gives us something to hoop onto for the hoop to bite into, and so we have some extra space. After I got the spray basting portion done, I did go ahead and come over to the S9 machine, and I just stitched down all four edges of this project using as scant a seam as possible. I stitched as close to the edge as I could. The purpose of this is just holds down the edges. There are going to be places where we actually quilt off the project, quilt off the side and onto the batting, and we just don't want that foot to leave any edge for that foot of the machine to catch and create a fold over. It just kind of makes a nicer project. I'm a long armor first, so it's a hard habit to break, basting down your project with a seam, and so you don't have to do this, but it's going to make you a nicer end result. So I would recommend it to anybody that's going to quilt anything anywhere. This makes a nicer result. You see I had a little bit of an oops right there, so I just took a little time and ripped those stitches out so I could make that a good and straight corner so we get ready for our next step. So now that we're done with all the regular sewing, I am attaching the embroidery unit of the S9. I'm always amazed at how simple this is. You'll see there's a little back cover on the machine. Once I take off that arm, there's a little back cover that covers the track and the connection point, and so you just need to take that off and store it in the storage case, and then the embroidery unit just slides on, and then the arm flips open. I recommend you read your manual before you attempt this, but it's really nice to have a visual, I think, even if you've read a book. So next here we're gonna change out the foot and then thread the machine. So we're changing from just a regular sewing foot to the embroidery foot, which is an important step. You need to make sure you do that. And then we're gonna lock out the panel here in just a second. You'll see it's important to set this lock before you thread your machine, because it just makes sure everything is just in the right place to accept that thread and for that needle threader to work. We're gonna take the thread through all the appropriate thread guides, and then we'll see in just a second there'll be a closer, better view of those thread guides just right by the needle. It's important to get them properly in all the thread guides, especially the small ones down by the needle. So you'll see here, we're going to go in this thread guide just above the needle and all the way to the left to get it in that notch. Then we're going to go up through what I call the mouth of the alligator, which is the needle threader mechanism. Just make sure you get it in the mouth of that alligator, and we're going to take the thread all the way up over the thread cutter on the side. And these are the three important steps for that thread cutter to work every time. Make sure we're all the way to the left in that notch just above the needle and that thread guide. Then we're going to go through the mouth of the alligator and up over the thread cutter, and then watch how that needle threader just threads perfectly every time. I want to mention right here while you watch me put the bobbin in the machine that the Janome S9 comes with two bobbin cases, one for embroidery and one for regular sewing. The one for embroidery pulls more tension on the bobbin. Even though we are using the embroidery function to quilt this table runner, we are going to use the regular bobbin case because even though we are technically embroidering, we're not doing an embroidery stitch, so we don't need that much tension, and it makes a nicer end result on the back. So the next step is we're going to import our design. So first we want to make sure we have our design saved on a jump drive and we know where it's saved. And then we're going to open the Janome AccuEdit software. We're going to make sure we have the right hoop selected that we're going to use, which right now we're using the largest hoop on the S9. This is the RE20A, so we've got the right hoop open that we intend to use, and we're going to make sure that our iPad and our machine are connected to the same Wi-Fi network and that we have our jump drive, and there you saw it, and I'm just now inserting it into the machine. There's a USB port on the side of the machine. So now we're going to connect our iPad to the machine. So I searched for a machine on my network, and there is the machine that I'm looking for, the Skyline 9, and so we are going to connect to that, and then we're going to open up our machine. This is going to allow us to access that USB port, that USB drive that's connected to the machine right here on our iPad. So we're going to navigate to the folder where we know our file is saved, and we're going to open up the appropriate file that we want to use. So this particular file, my hoop is just about as tall as the table runner is tall. So we want this design to fill the sewable space as large as we can, but we want to leave as much room to the left and right as we can, as we will need to line up. We don't want to fill the full space to the left and right because I just want to give myself a little wiggle room and not just set myself up for failure when I rehoop this after when we realign for the next hooping for quilting. So I like that. We're top to bottom as tall as we can get in the sewable space, but we have an inch or two there that gives us some room for lining up. So we're going to send this design over to the machine. The machine is going to ask us to make sure we have the right feet and hoop that we're going to attach. And so now, once we navigate through all those messages and make sure we're doing everything that we need, there we see our design is imported there onto the screen. So our next step is to hoop the project. So like I talked about earlier, we've got extra space all around, extra fabric. So gives us something to bite into, because we want what will make a nicer quilting is we want this to not just quilt up to the edges, we want it to quilt over a little bit. So we're going to actually hoop this where there's a little bit, so the hoop is off the table runner a little bit to start. Now I've cheated this. I didn't want to have to do this I want to do this in as few of hoopings as possible. So on the top and the bottom, we aren't actually going to be quilting right up to the edge, because there's about 3/4 of an inch or so on the top and the bottom that is not sewable space. Even though we can see it in our hoop, the needle won't travel that far. So it's not going to quilt over the edge on the top and bottom across the project, but we are going to hoop it so it quilts over the sides, and our binding is going to take up a little bit of that top and bottom space, so I'm not worried about that. But you see, I've got it hooped, I've got it as straight as I possibly could, and so now we are going to attach the hoop to the embroidery unit. This couldn't be simpler. There's this one little thumb screw, it just pops in there, and just one turn locks it in, and you are good to go. So now we've rolled up our excess fabric, and I will just say you want to just kind of keep an eye on that, because it can, as you see there, it can flop. But we're just going to press start, and we're going to watch ourselves quilt. But yeah, just keep a hold on that fabric, because there are instances where if that flops over, it could it could get caught in the stitches, and that creates a whole another mess of problems. So just kind of monitor it, especially with that much excess fabric tucked in there. But I didn't roll it very tight. It could have been rolled tighter, but there's actually quite a bit of throat space there. So we're just finishing up quilting down this first hooping. It goes unbelievably fast, and now we will see our results. I did realize when I finished this first hooping that I had the thread cutter turned off on this machine for a previous project, so I'll show you in just a second how to navigate. It's by default on, but if you do ever have a need to turn it off or turn it on, or adjust the amount of space, amount of thread that it leaves when it cuts, this is how you do it. You'll go to settings, go up to the embroidery settings, navigate 3 or 4 pages to the right, and turn the thread cutting on, and there you go. Now it's time to unhoop this first pass and re-hoop the project for lining up. So one thing that's going to be very important, you'll see you need to determine where your end point is, and we're going to use the grid. Every embroidery hoop comes with these grids, and so the gridded section is your sewable area, and that's very important because you don't want to get it hooped where the next part of where you need to sew, you get it hooped wrong, and then part of the area you need to sew is in your unsewable area. That won't work. So we're going to re-hoop this, and we're going to just kind of line up and make sure our end point is in the sewable area, because we want to overlap the end point with the new beginning point. And we want to make sure the top of our design that we previously quilted is in the sewable area, as well as the bottom of the design, because that way we'll know that our next pass will be. And then we'll also use that grid to line up my design as best I could. I picked a straight line on that truck and tried to get it straight on one of the grids. And now we are going to use the Janome AccuSetter software to line this second hooping up. This is a different software, different iPad app than we used the first time, but we're gonna get connected to our machine. And now we're going to take a picture with our iPad of our hoop. So these black marks on the hoop line up with these marks on the iPad screen. We're going to get them as close as we can. And then we're going to move the marks on the screen to match up with the marks on the picture we just took. And that's going to help this app calibrate to know exactly where our hoop is and help everything line up. So they make it really easy. There's a magnification there when you click on it, and you just drag these lines. So now it's imported our design from the machine to this iPad app. And now I can find the new start point of my design and line it up right on the end point of the last pass. I can make sure, if anything, if we were hooped crooked, we could adjust it here. We make sure that our design is where we want it, and then we're going to send it over to the machine. And so now when we put the hoop back in the machine and hit start, it has adjusted that design from the last time and moved it just where it needs to be. So it really couldn't be easier to re-hoop and go from one quilting pass to the next. It's very simple. And again, watch that your excess fabric doesn't get in the way. You need to kind of monitor that at first. But we're just gonna watch this thing quilt here for a second, and then we'll be able to see how good we did when we lined this project back up. So here it is finishing. So far it looks pretty seamless. It's also good that the busier the fabric around it, the better. And also, if it's not 100% perfect, well, we're really just pleasing ourselves, and we're the only ones that are ever going to know where any oopses are or anything that's less than perfect. And for me, I'm not ever really striving for perfection. We want to do the best we can do, but we also learn something on every project to take to the next one, and every project gets a little bit better and a little bit better. So here it is, finishing up this second hooping, and you can see I think we did pretty good. You can see our start point and our end point are overlapped. We might have one stitch or so of where it didn't line up, but you really can't tell it. You'd really have to look for it. So now you can see this is our third pass. I've rehooped it again, and it's finishing up this third pass. And for the fourth pass, I'm going to show you a different method of lining up this fourth hooping. We're not going to use the iPad this time. We're going to do it in a very low-tech way. So I took that grid that comes with the embroidery hoops, and with a dry erase marker, I just traced some key guide points of my design. I marked my start point, my end point, the tops and bottoms of some distinct curves. I show here, you want to make sure that you don't get your front and back of that mixed up and put the wet side of the dry erase marker, the side you wrote on your, get it in there upside down, actually get it on your project, because that could stain, so be careful with that. But now that I've got some guide markings, I've unhooped the design, and now we're going to use this grid and guide to rehoop it. Now I will say this process has a little more trial and error than the app, but if you are uncomfortable with using the app right off, if you don't feel like you're very tech savvy, you could start with this. Now I would encourage you to learn how to use the app because it is the easier process, but this can be done. So I've just lined up as I'm rehooping. I'm kind of putting that grid on there as a guide. I want to make sure my end point from my last hooping is as close to my start point that I marked on the grid as possible. I want to make sure that the tops of the designs where they're going to stitch that I marked on the hoop are lining up as best they can across from the places that have already stitched, and I think that looks pretty good. So now we're going to reinsert the hoop into the machine, and we're going to let it stitch, and we're going to see how well we line up, and I'm pretty pleased with it already. So you see my fabric is still flopping over a little bit into the hoop space. I'll show you here in a minute. I left the machine unattended for about a minute, and I had an oops. That excess extra fabric that's rolled up did flop over into the sewing area, did get caught up in the machine. I had to rip some stitches, and one of the worst thing that happened was it caused the project to come unhooped in the middle of the quilting. So now we have to attempt to rehoop this as best we can to get it all lined back up. So I'm showing you there's where it ended, plus the stitches I had to rip. That's where we're going to try to reline it up. Thankfully, we do still have our grid marked. Now, this would have been easily done using the AccuSetter app, but because we are still on our low-tech hooping, I'm going to use my grid to reline it up. So again, trial and error. I just could give it the best shot I could give. I got things lined up as close as possible, and so now we have to go back, and the machine now is just right where I left it as far as it's on the stitch it thought it was on. So now we have to back up the stitches to get it back to the spot that it was, so we can reline up, so get back to our starting point, because obviously it's missed some stitches in the middle there, either because it wasn't stitching where it thought it was, or because I had to rip them out. So we're just going to go to this little minus sign here, and we're just going to back up one stitch at a time, because it hadn't stitched very far before I found it, and we had to and we stopped it. So just going to keep, you see every time I hit one minus, it just nudges it. So we'll see here it was actually outlining some holly leaves, and so we'll get it right back to as close as we can, and we're just going to see how good of a job we did. most people will say that if your project comes unhooped in the middle of your project, if for some reason you forget and unhoop it, some people say that can't be done, or it can't be done well. We're going to be able to get this close enough for my taste. I know it won't be perfect, but I'm not going to scrap this whole project just because I did make a little mistake. So it is better to continue to monitor it. But anyway, so I've got it back pretty close to where I wanted it. Got to go just a few more stitches, and then you'll see I'm actually pretty pleased with where it lines up. I'm able to get it, and when I drop the needle down, the needle is going to go right into that stitching line. So you see the needle just went right into the stitching line. So it appears to be fairly well lined up. So we're gonna let it hit start, let it go, and all we can do is let it quilt and see. And we'll see pretty immediately here, let's stop it and inspect it, that it wasn't exactly 100% lined up. We were a little bit off, even though that needle fell right into the stitching line. We were a little bit off. So there is just a little bit of stitches that will go back and rip out right there. But I think ultimately once those stitches are ripped out that were already there, I don't think you're ever going to tell. I know I would have to hunt for it. So I'm actually pretty pleased with this. I think that was a successful fix to a problem, and I learned a valuable lesson, and that's what I try to take away from these things. Even if we come out with a project that might be a smidge less than perfect, we've learned something to carry on to the next one. So now we're here on the last hooping, and here we go. There is our finished table runner. I couldn't be more pleased. This project was start to finish on the Janome S9. We pieced it, we embroidered it, and we quilted it, and now we've bound it, and I'm just pleased as punch with how this project finished. Thank you so much for coming along with us today as we quilted this table runner. Really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I hope you subscribe to our channel so you get to see more videos in the future. Give us a comment. We love to hear feedback. Send us a message. Let us know what you liked about this video, and if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future. Let me know, do you have a Janome S9, and do you have any tips and tricks for quilting on it? But again, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.